ahead and get started though. So welcome everyone. I'm James Dice. I'm founder of Nexus Labs, your host today. I'm seeing a lot of new names flowing in here in the attendees list. So if we haven't met before, let me introduce Nexus and then I'll pass it over to Aaron, our today's moderator. So what is Nexus? It's a weekly blog and podcast covering the application and emergence of smart building technology. And like I like to say, without the fluff. It's also a membership community called Nexus Pro. So several of our panelists today are members of the community. We host monthly gatherings, workshops, and produce deeper dive content on smart buildings each month. And finally, it's a learning community. So we have an introductory course on smart buildings that has kind of overlapped with our membership community as well. And our next cohort for the course kicks off in August. So check out our website if you're interested in joining the cohort. So on to our discussion today. This is our first live broadcast in this new broadcast series. We'll be doing these monthly, so be on the lookout for our July invite. And before we get started, please put your questions for the panelists in the Q&A section in your Zoom window. You can click on Q&A down at the bottom. And then I'll moderate the Q&A session in the last 15 minutes of the session. So our discussion today will be moderated by Aaron Lapsley, principal and founder of System 2 Consulting. Aaron has been, like I like to say, nerding out on indoor air quality since way before it was cool. He's done an amazing job engaging with all the vendors in this space, sort of cutting through the noise, helping people like me understand what the heck's going on, and putting together this Aspire group, which is about to introduce to everyone. So without further ado, over to you, Aaron.
Thanks, James, appreciate it. This is a long time coming. We've been pulling this group together now for a couple months, and I'm really happy that we got it launched this week and that we're able to present to you today. So thanks everyone for taking some time with us on your busy Wednesday. As James mentioned, I'm the founder and principal of a consulting practice called System 2, focused on high performance buildings and building technology. In and of itself, I'm not an IAQ expert per se. I'm an HVAC engineer and person who's been operating in the smart building space for a long time now. I'm also a Nexus Pro member, so everybody should consider doing that because it's been a wonderful community been participating in. There are 5 founding organizations, one of which is mine, in the Aspire Alliance. And I want to give everyone, the representatives of the 4 other companies, a chance here to introduce themselves, starting with Alex.
Great, thanks, Aaron. My name is Alex Grace. I'm Vice President of Business Development at Clockworks Analytics, and we are an automated fault detection and diagnostics company, monitoring HVAC metering systems to identify top priorities when it comes to energy, indoor air quality, and maintenance, and currently doing that across over 400 million square feet, over 300,000 mechanical assets in 30 countries.
Thanks, Alex. Christian from Inverid.
Thanks, Aaron. My name is Christian Weeks. I'm the CEO of Inverid Systems, and we developed and sell air cleaning technologies for a full range of indoor air contaminants, particulate, as well as VOCs and also CO2. And we deploy this technology in commercial buildings to help deliver better indoor air quality, energy efficiently.
Appreciate that. Eric?
Thanks so much, Aaron and James. I'm Eric Malmstrom. I'm the CEO of Safe Traces. We're a safety technology company, an innovator that focuses on indoor air quality, food, and pharmaceuticals. Relevant to today's discussion in the indoor air quality space, we have the first and only aerosol-based diagnostic solution for testing HVAC systems and ventilation filtration in terms of how they're removing aerosol particulate like viruses from the air. So we really focus on the health and safety side of IAQ, and excited for the discussion. Thanks.
And Ron. Ron?
Hey guys, sorry, I had a internet issue here. So Ron, the co-founder, and I lead partnerships and business development for the company of Aware. Aware provides a network of sensors and data products to monitor IAQ, indoor air quality, and help you improve on them. So whether you're a business client or a user at home, our products can help you understand the issues at hand in real time and help you optimize for the highest level of indoor health and safety. So great to be here.
Appreciate that, Ron. So thanks, everybody. We're going to take just a moment here to explain what the Aspire Alliance is. And let me start at the beginning. So earlier this year, after having spent, as James mentioned, a number of years looking at indoor air quality and then particularly focusing on it during the pandemic, back when I was at Cushman & Wakefield, and we were evaluating all of these technologies and clean tech, prop tech companies related to IAQ, ventilation. I left Cushman in November to start my own practice, and was having these bilateral relationships or trilateral relationships with all of these great companies that were all doing parts of the story on indoor air quality. And as we all got to talking amongst ourselves, and some of these companies also had relationships with each other, we kind of came together as a group and understood that there was a lot of noise out there, also a lot of misinformation and just information gaps about indoor air quality. And so we pulled together to form an industry consortium, essentially, that really actually launched officially about 2 weeks ago. And you've probably seen, if you've been looking around at any of our social media profiles, a little bit of content this week as we've actually officially launched the group. And really what we are is a cooperative alliance focused on essentially two things: advocacy for a certain smart building type of strategy for IAQ, and then education, which I'll talk about a little bit, 3 different types of information gaps that we're trying to address on indoor air quality. We're currently composed of the 5 founding member organizations, all of whom just introduced themselves. And we are really dedicated to corporate, commercial, and institutional building, just essentially the built environment that's occupied by people. What we're hoping to do is really counter inaction and market noise and explain how. What we hear a lot about is what people want to accomplish. We sort of understand the goals, but we need a comprehensive approach that is simple for how to get there. And I do want to point out that as we're just getting this organization going, the sort of one main call to action that we have right now is, if you are an owner or manager of buildings, or know people that are, who might actually be interested in pursuing like a marquee project with the Alliance, particularly in the US or Canada, as our group is really focused on the West right now, where there's been less of a focus on indoor air quality historically over the last sort of decade or two. We'd love to discuss the opportunity to deploy a project that's going to follow this strategy I'm about to lay out. And so reach out to us directly if you're interested in that, and we're happy to explore that. So as we came together, there's really sort of 5 things that we were able to distill down as a group that we kept hearing from customers and clients, some of which we were all talking to at the same time. And those 5 things are essentially that the real estate or facilities industry is looking to monitor and improve IAQ and ventilation, but also measure and reduce passage and transmission risk. And I'm going to talk about the 2 different types of IAQ here in a moment. At the same time, doing any of this without directly addressing the cost in terms of carbon and energy is really going to be kind of a non-starter over the next decade or two. So we have to address that and tackle that head on. We also see that a lot of real estate stakeholders are looking to demonstrate their leadership by getting certified, and that there are increasingly a lot of performance-based certifications around indoor air quality specifically that really are kind of the leading practice. And then I think last, but probably most importantly, there's a lot of money moving towards institutional and commercial assets to do things to improve ventilation, filtration, and indoor air quality in general. And we want to make sure that we can direct investment to the highest value opportunities and solutions. And so we proposed a group. Before I go a little bit deeper on those 5 goals and why it makes sense for us all to pull together, I want to take a moment just to talk about air. So one of our missions is around education, and I want to take a step back. Sometimes I've showed this slide a few times since I've presented, and people have contacted me on the side and said they were surprised because they hadn't thought about what air was, maybe since like college, or maybe they didn't know at all. So 99.9% of air is stuff that when we say indoor air quality, we're not all that concerned about typically. So air is mostly nitrogen and oxygen. There's a little bit of the inert gas argon in there, and 0.1% of air is the type of stuff that we're talking about that could potentially be contaminants, right? So that's carbon dioxide and then other gases that are in the mixture. And what that means is it's hard to see indoor air quality. Aside from sort of temperature, which we're used to measuring with our thermostats or building automation equipment, and humidity, which we're all used to sort of feeling and dealing with when it gets dry in the winter time, or really humid in the summertime in a lot of our climates in the northern, in the summer now in the northern hemisphere. We really don't see things like CO2, VOC, the particulate matter in the air, and we certainly all have a good appreciation now that we don't see pathogens either, that they're silent, and it's a danger that goes unnoticed. So it's really important that we then focus on the hard problem of measuring and understanding indoor air quality. One of the things that we've observed is this sort of conflation that's gotten particularly acute bad over the last year and a half or so with the pandemic. Before the pandemic, most of the time when we talked about indoor air quality, we were talking about the right side of this diagram. And we were talking about the environmental variables. As we've all started to focus on health and safety, we've almost entirely been focusing on the left side of this diagram for the last year. The truth is both of these things are actually indoor air quality. We need to think about them differently, but they do have a lot of overlapping. And so when you hear terms like health, wellness, or tenant experience, occupant experience, those really are the kind of combination of these 2 types of IAQ, the facets of IAQ. And ventilation, the V in HVAC, ventilation and filtration really affect both. And so a lot of what we're going to be talking about with the Alliance is directly related to ventilation and how we do a better job of monitoring, operating efficiently our ventilation. So back to the 5 objectives. The first thing that really I think we're looking to tackle is that each of our organizations were touching on different parts of this strategy. And what we've experienced with our customers and clients is that they were being considered in isolation. So the first step oftentimes in pulling together a strategy is taking a step back and looking at things holistically. Then you think, well, what do I need to do to actually get there? And that's some of the things that are important here we've listed next to the 5 goals. Then you start to say, well, how do we then comprehensively address these with the least number of solutions possible? And that's why it started to make sense for all of us to pull together into an alliance. Look, we are a marketing and trade organization inherently looking to educate the market and advocate for a strategy. But the truth is that this strategy works with or without some of our specific organizations. But it's important that you first and foremost, consider this strategy comprehensively and actually attack it with best-in-class solutions. And that's what we think we've pulled together with the Alliance. So, what would a program look like that's going to implement these? It might look something like this. We're starting with testing and monitoring, we're improving, we're verifying, and then we're certifying. I mean, in a way, this looks like what we've been doing with smart buildings and with energy and sustainability programs for a while. I think indoor air quality is a really good analog to energy and sustainability. It's a bit behind in the West, but you can take a data-driven sort of smart building style approach to it in much the same way. I would say one of the things that's different is many of the certifications that focus on performance-based measures are fairly unique for indoor air quality. Things like reset and air rated are actually looking at what's happening in the building instead of just checklists. Both are important, but there are options that are looking at performance-based certifications. So look, at the end of the day, the takeaway message for what we're doing with Aspire is two things: advocacy and education. Advocacy is for a strategy that is comprehensive, data-driven, sustainable, and practical. And then on the education side, there's three information gaps that we're addressing. We're addressing a basic knowledge of what indoor air quality is, because I think that often gets overlooked in lieu of sales messages that target one small component of IAQ. We want to talk about leading practices out there in the industry related to IAQ. There's a lot of them out there. And then we, of course, want to focus on data and the value of data and information and how you actually design and operate buildings to promote indoor air quality and sustainability. So if you're looking to get in touch with us right now, the best place is at our website, aspireiaq.com. I'm going to stop the share here, and we'll transition into a panel discussion with the rest of the group.
Hey, Aaron, before you get started, I'm going to end this poll and share the results for everyone. 81% say that heightened awareness is here to stay. There you go.
I have to admit that number is higher than I might have guessed. I might have guessed 60-40.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's higher than I thought too. Maybe we pre-selected for people that believe in the heightened awareness.
Quite possibly, yeah. But no, that's good to see. That's good to see. I mean, look, I'm happy to see that, and I certainly hope that is true. So as we move out into the panel, we're going to talk with each of the companies about sort of what their organization does and how it applies to the mission of the Alliance. So I'm going to start with Safe Traces. So I mentioned air quality testing related to the health and safety side of IAQ. It was on the slide that there's sort of a difference in monitoring and testing when you look at the health and safety side. I think this is probably the most novel technology to a lot of our audience. So what are you testing and how does that work?
Yeah. So I guess that the question on everyone's mind today, or maybe twofold, as we get into reoccupancy, reopening. Number one, is my building safe? And number two, how can I make it safer? And in terms of how people are answering that question today, there are a variety of different approaches that range from qualitative, quantitative, theoretical, applied. What is absent is a way where you can get into real world spaces and specifically assess the ventilation and filtration for a respiratory aerosol kind of contaminant like COVID. And so what we've tried to do is through our core technology, which is essentially what we call surrogate particle technology, where you use kind of chemistry and science to safely recreate actual pathogens or contaminants. You can release those in buildings in a controlled way to answer basic questions like, where is there risk in the building? Where are there potential infection hotspots? How is the air flowing around? And what does that imply for health and safety? And then ultimately, how is the system performing and where should we spend money to enhance it? We do that through DNA tagged bioaerosol tracers, which you can release, and it's simulating safely someone coughing or sneezing and soon breathing and speaking, and they're infected with a virus. And we use a DNA taggant to help track where those particles are traveling within a facility, and then how they're decaying and how much different variables impact that decay within a building. That's important because that ultimately gives you ground truth data and allows you to test and verify your system in a way that you can make very practical decisions about those core questions of, is the building safe and how can you make it safer?
Are there any sort of headlines, from the testing that you've done on insights, for information that's sort of being generated for customers?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. As many of us who have been involved in the indoor air quality space have seen, there's guidance coming out in the U.S. from places like the CDC and ASHRAE and the American Industrial Hygiene Association. There's a lot of good guidance in there, but a lot of it is, changing. It's also not always consistent across all of those organizations. But some of the common recommendations are, bring in more outside air and ventilate the building, at higher rates than pre-pandemic, and increase the MERV levels within the filters and the central air handlers, and all sorts of things. And I guess what our data is showing is that some of those, there's a varying range of efficacy of those solutions. Things where you're addressing kind of the infection control and airflow at the building level, and where you're increasing the outside supply air rate across a building, is often not having as great an impact as I think many would believe. And really how the building level decisions then get to the front lines of the infection control battle in specific rooms, in high risk rooms that are enclosed, where there's prolonged exposure, that's what you really need to manage. So obviously the overall building systems are important, but within the room, things like, augmented solutions to the HVAC, like portable HEPA units, also can make a big difference. And so some of the findings we're getting is that when you increase the ventilation rate across a building, we're often seeing very similar results to, the previous ventilation rate. We're seeing that particles are often not making it from an occupied area to the filters from the central air handler that are serving that area, calling into question proportionally how important are those MERV levels in the central air handler. Portable HEPA units, we're finding that when those are sized correctly to a room and positioned correctly, then they can be very effective, but often people are not doing that. They're not sizing them, and they're putting them under kind of return vents and negating some of the benefits. And then also, I guess the final point is that we're seeing that the airflow conditions that have implications for infection control are constantly changing, based on the occupancy load of the building, whether it's summer, winter, seasonally, you're doing different things with the air, and that will really change the risk. So we're just putting numbers around that and allowing people to really see in their own space what is going on so they can make the best decisions possible. And previously, they have not had good ways of doing that.
Thanks, Eric. I want to talk about IAQ monitors for a minute, monitoring, and pivot to Ron. So monitoring indoor air quality, particularly the key environmental variables like particulate matter, VOC, CO2, temperature, humidity. This seems like sort of a no-brainer to a lot of us in the smart building community, but like checking our confirmation bias on this, I do talk to clients and industry partners who are A, not doing this, or B, actively avoiding it in some cases, which I think is unfortunate. But what is your defense why monitoring is an important part of a comprehensive approach to IAQ?
Yeah, so I mean, for us here, PM, VOCs, and CO2 are familiar terms, but for a lot of general public, it really is not. I mean, for example, CO versus CO2, those are kind of one of the most asked questions, but hey, what's the difference? For us, it's very easy question. However, I would like to think of this as a, tracking activities and vital signs of our health, right? That which sets the baseline, helps you set the goal, and also help you understand if your investments, whether it being time and efforts, are guiding you on the right track to achieve the goals that you set up based on the baselines, based on monitoring, right? So that's where and if you think about indoor air quality and how you could manage them, there are a few things that you can consider. Ventilation, which is a huge hot topic these days. Cleaning the air, purification, and whether you dehumidify or humidify, there are just a few things that you can do to manage and keep the IAQ at an optimal level. So monitoring really helps you understand the baseline and help you get to the goal that you can set up.
Yeah, I've said before on James's Nexus Pro gathering that IAQ monitors look a lot like electric meters did like 10 years ago or 15 years ago. You know, there were not a ton of connected meters 10 or 15 years ago. Now there's probably too many, quite honestly, but there's a lot of data coming out about how much energy a building is using, not a lot of data coming out about how, you know, other key variables, particularly how the air is performing in the space. How have you seen some of your big enterprise type customers use the data programmatically, you know, like in that kind of way, in that sort of smart building operations type of way to drive improvements?
Yeah, I mean, I would like to kind of tie that question to the latter part of your first question, which was, hey, do we really see people actively avoiding getting data? So, you know, data for us is really sharing knowledge and confidence. And what I mean by that is you understand that when we talk about liability and transparency, the whole industry is heading that way. We want to know, the tenants and occupants want to know, you know, every building will not score perfect score every time. We understand that every built environment will present you with different types of issues throughout a day, throughout a week, and throughout the lifetime of the real estate, right? So understanding what data could give you in terms of the baseline, and then use that data to provide the confidence in what you are putting together as a right solution to address certain things that you might find out based on monitoring is really, I think that's the power of data. I mean, we talk a lot about analytics and how we could use that as an insight to get to right solution. But data for us is really helping our clients understand where they are at the moment and really get to the confidence level that they could achieve by putting together the right solutions in place. I mean, you know, we're here together to help those clients think about the right solutions, right? So that's kind of our way to approach data and how we want to make sure that our product could be the sharing platform of that knowledge and confidence.
Yeah. I want to talk about analytics for a minute and pivot to Clockworks. But fault detection and diagnostics has been sort of a core capability for smart building programs, largely focused on energy for a long time now. So we know that a company like Clockworks can get you an energy ROI. How important is automated FDD style analytics for indoor air quality?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's quite foundational. And the reason being that for those that have building automation systems, so let's start there just to clarify, right? So where you have a lot of data already in your systems, there are so many small mechanical problems that can completely throw off any strategy when it comes to ventilation. And oftentimes that's needle in the haystack. So just to put real numbers to it, Aaron, I just pulled up, as we were talking in this webinar, pulled up a dashboard looking at a subset of our portfolio where I can see across 81,000 zones. And I can see that in the last 7 days, we're identifying about 10% of those zones with indoor air quality problems. So what kind of problems are we talking about? We could be talking about a damper that's not functioning properly, about a supply flow that's way below its set point. We're not getting the proper ventilation to the space for one reason or another. And those reasons can actually be pinpointed. So the question becomes, if you're a building owner or a portfolio manager and you have 1,000 VAVs, you have 10,000 zones, how do you identify that 10%? And knowing that that 10% is going to change over time because we're talking about mechanical degradation and issues will pop up. So it's a needle in the haystack. What fault detection diagnostics does is really point you to those priorities. No one has time to look at 10,000 zones operation every single day when it comes to looking at damper positions and CFM ratings. So being able to source those problems immediately and say, you know, something as simple as probably the two most common things we identify: a stuck damper, or an issue of damper control that could be the result of simply a loose set screw. So that actuator can no longer control the mechanical operation of the damper, and then can't control the ventilation. So identifying the needle of the haystack, sourcing it, prioritizing it to say, we don't have time to look at 1,000 problems. What are the ones that are most going to have the greatest impact on indoor air quality and our ability to keep a healthy environment?
Yeah, and I've written before about how CO2 zone control is a really effective mitigation strategy for risk in occupied rooms. And I've seen the testing from Safe Traces that would verify that conclusion. Yeah. The issue there is, operating a VAV system, or really any system, with the added element of CO2 control in addition to temperature control adds another level of automation complexity. And it starts to, as you add in those advanced control sequences, you need analytics even more at that point in order to maintain the proper operation of those systems and get them dialed in. What is Clockwork's approach to IAQ focused analytics specifically? Is there anything that you all have done?
Yeah, it's really the major impacts have been revisiting. So we always had IAQ as a part of our platform. So we're identifying energy issues. Those are people are more familiar with: simultaneous heating and cooling, and underloaded loops, and messed up economizer sequences, et cetera. And then the indoor air quality side was always there, but it was more in the category of comfort. It was something that was secondary, that certain types of stakeholders cared about, but some didn't, right? Now, some organizations do. If you're in healthcare, patient comfort is critical. So you have metrics around that, and that's a significant part of your rating and how you're judged as a facilities organization. So for certain segments, that was really important. But what we've done is really elevated and allowed you to filter and source those indoor air quality problems and see them much clearer, so that users that care about that, the prominence is there. And we are seeing a lot of people be really interested in that. A common question for facilities organizations we work with, or when we're starting to talk, is, hey, you have 500 air handlers. Do you know where the stuck fresh air dampers are? That simple question of how much we may be investing in mitigation strategy, but we know a certain percentage of them are stuck. That means no outdoor air coming into the building. And the question becomes, can you consistently identify where those are when it happens and have a process in place to respond? That process piece is important as well.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about the S in our group's acronym. And so Aspire, the S in Aspire is sustainable. And so, look, I think it's important. I think we all thought, as we conceived of this group, that it's important that you address sustainability as part of indoor air quality. And really, we're all going to become much more accustomed, I feel like, as a community of interest and just as an industry, in focusing on sustainability in everything we do, especially over the next sort of 10 to 20 years, as you think about how much the world is moving. And I always like to point out that Local Law 97 in New York, despite what's going to end up happening with it, when it was first released, it was pretty indiscriminate and unbiased in how much it punished landlords for having inefficiently running buildings. And I suspect the world is just going to look a lot more like that 10 years from now. So it's important to focus on the S, the sustainable part. But let's turn to that in the context of IAQ. So look, I think we all understand that there's a trade-off between IAQ and energy consumption at a simplistic level. Like if I open the window at my house to help ventilate and it's summertime, I am going to run my air conditioner more in order to maintain temperature control. And so there is a trade-off. But I think personally, and I've had slides that I've used to talk to clients on this for 6-7 years at this point, I think that trade-off is a bit overblown. It's not the whole story. So let's talk about like how we address that trade-off and do both things at the same time. So Christian, to you, that's sort of what you do, or what at least some of your main product lines do within Verid. How does a building save energy and improve indoor air quality?
Yeah, no, it's a great topic. And I agree with your premise, which is that going forward, we have to find a way to deliver great indoor air quality, but do it energy efficiently. Because on the one hand, we have the concerns about health, and we've got the studies that show better indoor air quality leads to better cognitive function and performance. On the other hand, we have investors, we have millennials, we have all sorts of stakeholders, including now the federal government, not only state and local government, saying we have to build sustainably. We have to get to net zero. And that, of course, is a bit of a moral imperative for us as we think about climate change. So doing the two together is critical. And as you highlight, there's been a tension between the two, between indoor air quality and energy efficiency. Your analogy with your home and the window open is a very good one. Over the last few years, I think it's fair to say that energy efficiency has gotten the upper hand, has been prioritized. But obviously with COVID now, the spotlight is on indoor air quality. And so this is a very timely conversation. And obviously this is really a core part of what the Alliance is about with that S. So, to step back a little bit, it turns out that most buildings rely on what's called dilution ventilation, which is essentially replacing indoor air with outside air. In office buildings, this often happens up to 18 times a day in order to dilute contaminants that are generated by the building materials, the cleaning supplies, but also by the people in them, which are exhausting CO2 as we breathe. So we're talking about VOCs from the building, we're talking about CO2 from people, and of course with COVID, we're also talking a lot about bioaerosols that are airborne, that are transmitted through the air. So the challenge becomes that in hot and cold climates, using dilution ventilation, using outside air to deliver good indoor air quality is very energy intensive, because all that outside air needs to be conditioned, heated or cooled, dehumidified before it can be circulated throughout the building. And in many buildings, not surprisingly, dilution ventilation is the largest energy load in the building. So the question is, as you said, how can we deliver good indoor air quality without being as dependent on energy intensive dilution ventilation? How can we reconcile this tension between energy efficiency and indoor air quality? And that's really what Enverde has focused on. And the answer is that we can clean large volumes of indoor air so that we don't have to replace all the indoor air with outside air constantly in order to maintain good indoor air quality. And to do this, Enverde has developed air scrubbing technology that can remove all the contaminants of concern from the building, molecular or gaseous contaminants. So everything from VOCs, from ozone, but also CO2, which, as I said before, comes from people. And by removing these contaminants, we can clean the air at its source and deliver great indoor air quality without the energy penalty, as people now refer to it, that is associated with dilution ventilation. This, of course, is especially useful for buildings where outside air is not what's often referred to as fresh air. And we see this more and more with wildfires and, unfortunately, just the increase in pollution. So this concept of resilience now, in terms of not being as tied to outside air, is an emerging theme that we're seeing in the market as well. So what we're able to do is essentially clean this indoor air, remove all these contaminants from indoor air using air scrubbers. We can also use high efficiency filters, as Eric and others have spoken to, for bioaerosols, and together deliver great indoor air quality without that dependence on as much outside air. And this is, in our view, the path to delivering great indoor air quality and doing it energy efficiently, helping us achieve those sustainability goals as well as those indoor air quality objectives.
Yeah, that makes sense. And, I think it's important to note here that there's a lot of confusion around some of the guidance that has been provided by organizations, particularly ASHRAE, as it relates to the pandemic. And look, I in no way mean to cast any kind of bad light on what ASHRAE was doing. I mean, I think their work was really important during the pandemic. We all got caught a bit blindsided in the sort of buildings world about what to do about infectious aerosols with this pandemic. And it's been an evolving situation over a period of time. But I will point out that some of the guidance from ASHRAE, Eric kind of touched on this earlier, has been blunt and I would say conservative. So James, I know one of the things that you've banged on a little bit about on LinkedIn and social media is like can we get rid of the overrides to get the demand control ventilation back on, which is sort of a poor man's version of what you've described that Envera does, Christian. I think we're kind of coming to a point now where we need to start actually addressing and making those decisions more clearly. Eric, I'm interested to hear from you about some of the things you've been finding with testing on central recirculating systems and the sort of relative priority of filtration and dilution ventilation from big central recirculating systems, which in this part of the world that we are, all in the US, are extremely common in commercial and institutional buildings.
Yeah. So I guess just to kind of frame this and simplify or like, set up my response, what I think Christian is saying in some ways, and what our data has found, is that more outside air is not always good or even having an impact. And recirculation isn't always bad if you're properly kind of cleaning and filtering and scrubbing the air. I think where our data comes in is how much is actually recirculating in an occupied area, in a room, or wherever you're going to have people within a facility who may be infected. Where are those particles going, and are they making it back to the central air handler? And as I've mentioned in my previous comments, we found, just taking one example for a large corporate client, they're looking at upgrading their central air handler with a new technology. And they wanted us to come see, well, could you do a direct filter challenge test to see how effective this system is? And we said, sure, we'll do that. But also probably the more important question to ask is, for the areas that this upgraded device is going to serve, is the stuff even making it back there? And what we found in this specific test was that the particulate was over 99.99% diluted, or over 10,000 times before it even hit the filter. The filter was having an impact, but proportionally it was so insignificant, that it really called into question, well, do we really need this piece of equipment or not? And obviously we are one data point in that decision. They would have not had a way to kind of understand that before. We helped reframe what they're thinking. But yeah, I think we have generally found that while we are, testing with DNA is a very sensitive material. So we can use small amounts of it to then pick up where is it getting within large facilities. And we're getting some signal, like as many who've followed the kind of the COVID saga, know that 6 feet, particulate is traveling much further than that when it aerosolizes. But the question is, like, how much of it, and is it at a level that we should be concerned about from an infection standpoint? And we're finding that things are very well diluted by the time it hits some of these other solutions that often have big price tags. And so then it says, well, really, maybe you should be looking at fighting the battle, on the front lines in the room. Like, how is the bigger system impacting the room? And then what is the role of the central system versus kind of other things that you can be doing within the room? That could be as simple as door open, door closed, or various other things you can do that may have a smaller price tag and may be much more effective. So I think that kind of answers your questions. Things are moving around, but really you have to be asking proportionally how much risk is associated with that movement, and then where are you going to put your money, to get the greatest effect, which is kind of going back to the one of the bullets of our coalition, helping people spend their money smarter and conversely not wasting it.
Yeah, I just want to jump in on that. This concept that Eric, you've raised about the proportional impact of different mitigation strategies, because and build on the ASHRAE comment from before as well. ASHRAE, for better or worse, is the industry sort of gold standard. And for people looking at what to do around COVID, everybody's looking at the ASHRAE guidance. I think the good news is that we're all learning together, and technologies like yours, Eric, and research that has been done since COVID started has evolved our thinking. And what I want to sort of give a shout out for is ASHRAE's updated core recommendations, which were published, I believe it was February, late January or February this year, and have then been reflected in all the building readiness and reopening guides. But the updated core recommendations highlight a shift in ASHRAE's position around how we maintain safe spaces around COVID. Initially, the guidance was simply open the dampers, as much outside air as possible. Let's dilution ventilation is the solution. What the updated core recommendations now say is exactly what you're saying, is at least minimum outside air per ASHRAE standards. And then let's go with local air cleaning and higher MERV filters. They're still saying central filters are good, MERV 13 or higher is good, but there's also language saying local air cleaning and local clean technologies are great. And if needed, beyond that, to further reduce risk, then maybe, yes, we do need to open up the dampers some more. But ASHRAE is no longer leading with that. And that is a big shift. And that's a good thing because the industry has a bit of a religion with more outside air is automatically better indoor air quality. And Joe Allen's done the research that shows elevated CO2 levels lead to lower cognitive functions. But what people often miss is that he said lower CO2 levels. He didn't say more ventilation. And so the question is, can we deliver lower CO2 levels? Can we control these bioaerosols locally, which is what your research is showing is more effective? Because, by the way, that's also the more energy efficient way to do it. And that's how we achieve our sustainability goals while delivering good indoor air quality. So I love what you're saying and totally agree. And do want to give credit to ASHRAE for evolving their thinking, but ASHRAE is slow and consensus based. And so these things take time and we need to be out front educating the market. And that's really what Aspire is core mission is about.
One other nudge on ASHRAE is that it's big and there's a lot of different committees. And so one that I'd like to point people to that maybe everyone's not quite as aware of because it's a bit wonky is ASHRAE Guideline 36. ASHRAE Guideline 36 is best in class sequence of operations primarily for zone and air handling unit equipment. And it includes as part of that logic sequence of operations for CO2 zone control and what the fault detection logic should look like on that on all of the sequence of operations in the guideline. And so, moving towards, I think there's a general industry recognition, including those updates from February, Christian, that we really ought to move more towards local space or occupied zone level considerations for transmission risk. That's good, move in the right direction. What do you do about it? Well, you get your zones to ventilate properly. If you can, you spend your money to put in CO2 control or something that's going to improve local ventilation. And then you do fault detection and diagnostics to make sure that stuff is working properly. So, look, there's a lot of pieces and parts to ASHRAE, but I would point people to Guideline 36. James, I think at this point, we want to use the last sort of 12 or 13 minutes here to do a Q&A. So I'm going to shoot back over to you.
Awesome. That was really great, guys. And thanks to everyone in the chat for a bunch of great discussion points. If you put a question in the chat, I'm not going to get to it because it got buried. I'm going to work off of the Q&A. So if you have a question that's not in the Q&A, please go ahead and plop it in, even though we probably won't get to all of them. I'm going to go with Chris's question first, and it's a two-part question. Can you please say a few words about VOCs versus semi-VOCs? And then do VOC sensors catch semi-VOCs as well? Who wants to take a stab at that one?
So I'll start, and as I could start with saying that all TVOC may not detect the SVOCs and total volatile organic compounds versus semi-volatile organic compounds, right? So I think we need to get to the individual chemical level if that is helpful for us, for this question. And at the same time, VOCs, from our experience and clients' experience, it's a very, by definition, it's a complex chemical to clean. So I would love to, let the panelists here to kind of jump in to kind of share their perspectives on cleaning, how they could track and clean. But from our perspective, I could share with the crowd here that VOCs has been one of the most complex problems to solve, and the sources of it, and then the cleaning methods.
Cool. And I think a follow-up question there that Chris asked that's I think also a really insightful question is, how do you expect building control sequences to change with VOC monitoring?
I can jump on that one. So beyond implementing air cleaning equipment, which essentially can scrub out most, if not all, of those chemicals, and I'll let Christian talk about that. From a control sequence perspective, if you have an IAQ monitor, and a monitor is kind of an industry term to say like a group of sensors. There's typically 5 main variables that a monitor measures: temperature, humidity, CO2, PM2.5, and TVOCs. If you have a monitor with those variables that you can integrate with your building automation system, so Aware has a BACnet version of their Omni sensor that allows you to get that data into your BMS. It's relatively straightforward to incorporate the VOC data point as a trigger for increased ventilation, and in somewhat analogous way to the way you would do it with CO2, which has just been much more common historically because of the availability of inexpensive sensors.
Got it. Cool. I'm going to go to Chad now, and this might be a good one for you, Aaron, as well. What building certifications do you recommend for the majority of commercial buildings in the US? And he lists several of them, right, in different verticals. But maybe you could just talk about how people can, sort of validate and prove and sort of show what sort of indoor air quality is happening in their building.
Your choice of building certification is a decision that affects the sort of business and operating model of your building and the values of your organization. What I will say is there is a lot of theater when it comes to IAQ, which just means, as James would say, marketing fluff versus reality. And the sort of checklist or prescriptive standards have a tendency to be the ones that have a lot of that fluff. Now, granted, if you're designing a new building, you don't have an operating building to measure data in, and so you have to use a prescriptive checklist. And I totally understand that. I don't, I've been a lead AP since 2007. I believe in what the USGBC is doing and other similar organizations. That said, I think for the vast majority of real estate out there, we need to shift towards performance-based standards. And depending on whether or not you want to focus on risk or environmental variables, there's different approaches. I am a Reset AP and I support Reset openly. I'm also increasingly getting interested in Aerated's approach to this. They're based out of the UK, Reset's based out of Shanghai. Both have growing operations in the US and Canada and the North American markets. What's interesting about Aerated is they do have a design and operations checklist that sets you up with a good score in order to get their AirScore certification. But overall, what I like about both is that they are focused on performance and not just on things you've done that might be good proxies for IAQ. They're actually measuring the variables. What's interesting about Reset as an industry standard is they also have a standard for the technology, and that's really important because actually, solutions like Aware's are accredited as a monitor and a data platform, and some are one or the other as well, that sort of make it so if you're getting one of those solutions, you know that they meet a certain standard for commercial grade technology, which is really interesting. But I wouldn't recommend one certification, just directly answer the question, across the board. It depends on what you want to do, but I would definitely trend in the direction of performance-based certification.
Cool. A couple of stakeholder-focused questions here. So this one's from Paul in Dublin. He's asking around, who do you find is demanding? And who, that might be a tough question to parse, but maybe we start with different verticals and then different stakeholders within those verticals. Who's demanding IAQ monitoring and optimization out in the market right now?
Please go ahead, Eric. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, taking kind of the health and safety piece, I'd say that where we have had the greatest demand and where they're coming to us, we're not so much going to them, is in knowledge economy businesses, where, in those where there's an imperative to get people back into workplaces and where they fundamentally value, the occupants within a space more than just viewing the space as a financial asset and are kind of managing to low cost. So I think they're dealing with the pressure of they need to run a business, and that business, to be productive, needs people in the space making things, doing various things, and those employees have high expectations. As we've probably seen, there's a lot of concerns about workplace safety right now. There's polls that show that there's a lot of mistrust regarding that. And so whether you're an owner occupier or in the Class A part of the commercial real estate market, and then even beyond kind of business into schools and higher ed and so forth, I think places that are essential use and where they're going to be getting hard questions on, well, I'm only coming back in if it's safe, what are you doing, all that. That's where we have gotten, from a health and safety standpoint, most of the demand coming in. And then, the next step of that is, well, once you've kind of done some testing on the safety of the space, what are we doing moving forward? Because it's not just the pandemic. There's now greater awareness of the impact of indoor air quality on cognition and all these things that I think have become more mainstream. And so people want to know moving forward that IAQ is going to continue to be safe. So I'd say that's like the bleeding edge from our experience. Sorry, go ahead, Ron.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, so I truly believe that monitoring and putting the right pieces in place to mitigate as part of the solution is important for all across verticals. In terms of stakeholders, though, we have seen some stakeholders that really kind of avoiding getting to the bottom of that knowledge in the beginning, right? As we talked about as early on, but the whole trend about what Eric just talked about, the workplace, the built environment, safety and health, productivity is here to stay. And if the building across or built environment across the street is sharing data and sharing information, are you gonna not share data and try to kind of keep the data to yourself, or try to ignore intentionally? So I think the trend is definitely going to a place where share more information, really share the knowledge and also the solution that you are putting in place, so that everybody can be confident in their built environments, right? So I think acknowledging the trend is also an important important thing to acknowledge here, and some of the questions I'm seeing on the channel.
Very good. Well, we have about a minute left here. Aaron, I'm wondering if you have any sort of concluding remarks. What can people do, sort of action items, takeaways, that kind of thing, as we close out here?
Yeah, sure. Check us out at aspireiaq.com. We're also going to be publishing a lot of content. It's one of the main things we're doing together as a group on the sort of information gap topics that I mentioned. So we'll end up having a presence on Twitter. We already have a presence on LinkedIn related to that. So follow us in those locations. We will be developing over time ways to expand participation and potentially membership as well. Right now, we're kind of keeping things tight and concise as we're really just getting off the ground. And thank you so much for hosting us, James. This was a great opportunistic moment for us to be out in public with this organization. But we are still very early in our journey. So open to ideas and feedback on that. There is a contact us form on aspireiaq.com if you want to get in touch, or just ping me on LinkedIn or send me an email. But that's really where we are right now. Again, the one big call to action is, you've heard a little bit more about the approach we're looking to take here. We think it's the right one. Regardless of any of our sort of member organizations, we really truly believe that this is the right coordinated and comprehensive approach to tackling this topic, which is complex. But we are looking for a couple of buildings, very small number of projects where we can deploy this strategy, and make a marquee project out of those locations, including potentially, if they're interested, certification with some of the programs I talked about just a moment ago. So if you have anyone that anyone in mind that might be looking to do that, please do reach out, and let's get that started right away.
Awesome. Thanks, Aaron. And for all the questions that we didn't get to in the chat, maybe we'll repackage those or something into pieces of content. But I just want to say thanks to everyone for coming and for being interested in this topic. Obviously, it's an important one moving forward. At least 81% of us think so. So thanks, everyone, and have a great rest of your Wednesday.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, James. Thanks, everyone.
Recording.